And the king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself, and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished, for that is determined shall be done. Neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any god, for he shall magnify himself above all.
In the previous video, we saw that pagan Rome, the daily or regular form, was replaced by the abomination that makes desolate, when Justinian I reclaimed Rome from the Ostrogoths and gave the city to the papacy. Daniel 11 verse 33, Gabriel points to a long period of papal persecution against those who were struggling to preach the pure, unfiltered Word of God, which contradicts Catholic dogma. Verse 34, when the martyrs, such as Calvin and Huss fell, they, the martyrs, cause, shall be holpen. That is, they shall be given a little help, when the great Reformation movement led by the intrepid German monk, Martin Luther, and his co-workers was established. The verse continues by saying that many shall cleave to them with flatteries. The German states promoted the Reformation, and it became popular. Many who joined the Reformation were insincere. They joined the movement because it was becoming popular. Verses 35, though restrained, papal persecution was not eliminated. Rather, it surfaced whenever there was opportunity. The bloody Queen Mary of England was a mortal enemy of Protestants. She persecuted those who would not convert to Catholicism, and by historical accounts, she burned 300 at the stake. Verse 36, and the king or ruler shall do according to his will. Gabriel communicates in a complicated manner. He shifts focus abruptly. Verses 36 and 37 must be read together in order to understand what is truly being said. The king referenced in verse 36 is not the papacy, because in verse 37 is found the phrase, nor regard any god. The papacy is an admixture of church and state. It is a religio-political entity. Thus, when we read verses 36 and 37, and referencing verses 34 and 35, we note that this king must appear towards the end of time. 2. It must be a willful, deliberate power. Verse 36 says that it does according to its will. And 3. It is an atheistic power. Verse 37, it doesn't regard or respect any god. These 3 points of prophecy are fulfilled in the French Revolution. Voltaire, who Mozart called a rascal and a scoundrel, sowed the seeds of atheism that bore fruit in France. Building on the foundation of men like Rousseau, D'Alembert, Diderot, the net result was the Reign of Terror in 1793. As historian Walter Scott in his work on Napoleon puts it, the Bishop of France was brought forward to declare to the convention that the religion, which he had taught so many years was, in every respect a piece of priestcraft. It had no foundation either in history or sacred truth. That is, Christianity has no historical or spiritual relevance. The general sentiment in France was, and I quote, the Supreme King, the God of the Jews and the Christians, is but a phantom. Jesus Christ is an impostor. At this juncture, France prohibited all forms of religious worship, except that of liberty and country. It closed 150 churches and Bibles were burned publicly. Verse 39, thus shall he do in the most strongholds with a strange god. France created the worship of the idol known as the Goddess of Reason, a heathen ritual regulated by the French National Assembly. This continued until Napoleon rose to the ranks of provincial consulate in 1799. Verse 39 continues, and shall divide the land for gain. Prior to the French Revolution, all property in France was owned by the upper class. By law, these lands could not be divided. But the French Revolution abolished these laws, and the land was disposed in small parcels at publicly held auctions. The historical records show that within 3.5 years, the French Revolution devolved in anarchy and terror, and out of it arose Napoleon Bonaparte, who placed himself at the head of the French government. Verse 40, And at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him. And the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots, and with horsemen, and with many ships. The application of this prophecy is seen in 1798, when Napoleon went to war with both the king of the south, which we saw in previous videos was centered in Egypt, and the king of the north, was centered in Greece, which at this time was ruled by the Ottoman Turks. Verse 40 states that the south, Egypt, pushed, or put a feeble resistance, while the north, Turkey, was a whirlwind of chariots, horsemen and many ships. The beginning of 1798, the French Directory wanted Napoleon to make advances against England. However, Napoleon convinced the Directory that England would be more vulnerable if its eastern trade in Egypt and Asia were intercepted. May 3, 1798, empowered by the Directory's decree, Napoleon left Paris with 500 ships, 40,000 soldiers and 10,000 sailors. Egyptian ruler, Murad Bey, was sounded defeated in the Battle of the Pyramids. In August of the same year, the English Navy, led by Rear Admiral Horatio Nelson, destroyed the French fleet at the Battle of the Nile. England didn't want Egypt to be a French colony, as this would threaten its trade route to India. The prophecy says that the king of the North, Asia Minor, will come as a whirlwind. February 27, 1799, Napoleon, undeterred by his loss to England, attacked the armies of the Sultan with 18,000 men. He had captured Cairo in Egypt, and beginning from thence, he proceeded to Syria. Napoleon captured Jaffa, known as Joppa in the Bible, but he met heavy resistance by the Turks in Samaria. England intervened, and Sir Sidney Smith sent ships to reinforce the Ottoman troops. On May 21, 1799, Napoleon, being overwhelmed by the Ottoman-English alliance, retreated to Egypt. Much history is left to be explored in chapter 11, but I will end on this note. Verse 42, he shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. When Napoleon retreated to Egypt, a Turkish fleet landed 18,000 men at Abu Qir in Egypt. Napoleon defeated the Turks and decimated Abu Qir, but he had to return to Europe to look after the interests of his own country. He left General Kleber in charge of the region. England allied with the Turks, and on March 13, 1800, they drove the remnants of Napoleon's army out of Egypt. Napoleon sets his sight on conquering Europe. History records the end of Napoleon's empire in the battle at Waterloo in Belgium. We will begin our discourse on chapter 12 in the next video.